The El Clásico, Real Madrid versus Barcelona. There are regular rivalries, and then there's El Clásico. This isn't just about football, it's about identity, politics, and pride that runs deeper than the pitch. Real Madrid has always been seen as the establishment's club, the shiny white shirts with historical connections to central Spanish power, its royal patronage, and its positioning as a symbol of Castilian power, while Barcelona has carried that Catalan more than a club badge of honor, with deep connection to its history and culture, serving as a symbol of unity and resistance. That's why this game feels so personal. Every pass, every tackle, and every goal carries decades of history behind it. And then you throw in the players. Messi and Ronaldo basically turned this into a two-man war for a decade. Before them, you had Ronaldinho silencing the Bernabeu with a smile, Figo being branded a traitor and having a pig's head thrown at him, and even the likes of Mourinho and Guardiola making it tactical theatre. It's drama that would make Netflix jealous. What makes El Clásico different is that it never really cools down. Even in years when one team is stronger, the game finds a way to deliver, whether it's last-minute winners, wild comebacks, or straight-up chaos on the touchline. This isn't just Spain's biggest rivalry, it's arguably football's biggest show. And if you think Spain is heated, wait until you hear about Superclásico, Boca Juniors versus River Plate. If El Clásico is the most famous rivalry, the Superclásico might just be the most chaotic. Boca Juniors and River Plate don't just split Buenos Aires, they split the entire country of Argentina. Boca represents the working-class, gritty identity of La Boca, while River, with their old stadium in the affluent Núñez district, were always labelled as the rich club, and the fans are wild. Boca's La Bombonera is a stadium that literally shakes when people jump in unison, while River's Monumental is an intimidating bowl of noise. When these two meet, it feels like the earth itself is vibrating. Even players say the atmosphere feels like you're playing football inside a thunderstorm. The rivalry has delivered everything from legendary finals to absolute mayhem. The 2018 Copa Libertadores final was so explosive that they had to move it out of South America entirely, and it ended up being played in Madrid because the streets of Buenos Aires basically turned into a war zone. And that's not even an exaggeration. Fans have been hospitalized, games have been abandoned, and the passion is so raw, it almost feels dangerous. But if you think Argentina is wild, wait until you cross into Scotland. I'm talking about the Old Firm derby, Celtic versus Rangers. The Old Firm derby between Celtic and Rangers isn't just a football rivalry, it's Glasgow's heartbeat, and sometimes its curse. On one side, you've got Celtic, historically tied to the Irish Catholic community, and on the other Rangers, historically tied to the Protestant Unionist community. So every time these two play, it's not just about 3 points, it's about deeply rooted social differences, and the games themselves are brutal. Forget tiki-taka, this is 90 minutes of full-blooded tackles, flying elbows, and chants that make you question whether you accidentally walked into a political rally. Players who come from abroad always say they weren't ready for the sheer hostility. Imagine moving to Scotland thinking you're just going to play some football, and then you realise half the city basically despises you based on the shirt you put on. The Old Firm has given us everything from pitch invasions to referees getting death threats to entire pubs closing on match day because it just isn't safe. Yet, at the same time, it's one of the most watched derbies in the world because the drama is unmatched. Even when Rangers dropped down the divisions a decade ago, Celtic fans still kept the rivalry alive by mocking their fall, and when Rangers fought their way back up, the fire came back. And speaking of bitter rivalries that only seem to grow, let's head back to England. Northwest Derby, Manchester United versus Liverpool. This isn't a normal derby where fans can shrug it off as just football. Manchester United versus Liverpool is pure hatred born out of history. Before football even mattered, the two cities were already clashing because of trade. When Manchester built the ship canal in the late 1800s, it cut Liverpool out of the shipping business. And from there, the bitterness just stuck. By the time football exploded, it was the perfect fuel for a fire that's never gone out. On the pitch, it's been about bragging rights over who's the king of English football. Liverpool dominated in the 70s and 80s, and United took over under Ferguson in the 90s and 2000s. And now Liverpool's resurgence under Klopp has reignited the whole thing. Both sets of fans will tell you they're the biggest club, the most successful, the true giants, and neither will ever back down. The energy inside Anfield or Old Trafford on Derby Day is something else. You'll hear chants designed to cut as deep as possible, songs mocking tragedies, and an intensity that makes even seasoned players admit it feels different. Gary Neville once said he hated Liverpool so much that he wouldn't even say the word Liverpool out loud, and that pretty much sums it up. The funny thing is, ask any neutral fan and they'll admit this fixture is box office. It doesn't matter if it ends 0-0. The tension is still enough to keep you hooked. And that's the thing. Sometimes the rivalry itself is the spectacle. Now, staying in Europe but with a bit more style, we've got a city that's split right down the middle. Derby della Madonnina, AC Milan versus Inter Milan. Milan isn't just a fashion capital, it's a football capital, and the Derby della Madonnina is proof. AC Milan and Inter Milan share the same stadium, San Siro, but that's about the only thing they agree on. The rivalry was born from a split. Milan was founded in 1899, but in 1908, some members broke away after a dispute over foreign players. They created Internazionale, a name that made their philosophy clear. The city is divided between red and black on one side and blue and black on the other, and the derby is their way of deciding who really runs Milan. What makes this rivalry so special is that it's got a bit of everything. You've got decades of history, European dominance, iconic players switching sides, and fans who turn the San Siro into a canvas of smoke, chants, and massive tifos that are basically works of art. On the pitch, the games have given us everything from Shevchenko screamers to Materazzi and Rui Costa standing in front of flares with that iconic photo. And more recently, we had Zlatan coming back to Milan and stirring the pot, because of course Zlatan can't resist a bit of chaos. And it hasn't just stayed in Italy. This derby has spilled over onto Europe's biggest stage, from fiery Champions League knockout ties to all-Italian semi-finals. Not many rivalries can say they've shaped the Champions League in the same way. And just across Italy, there's another rivalry where silence isn't an option, because Rome doesn't do calm. Derby della Capitale, Lazio versus Roma. Rome is dramatic by nature, so of course its derby is pure chaos. Lazio and Roma don't just dislike each other, they live to make the other side miserable. This isn't like Milan where the rivalry has elegance to it. No, in Rome, it's raw, passionate, and borderline unhinged. The story goes back to 1927, when Roma was formed from a merger of several clubs to create a strong team for the capital. Lazio, who already existed, basically said, "Nah, we're not joining," and right there, the divide began. From that point on, it's been red and yellow against light blue, with the city split street by street, family by family. And when they meet, anything can happen. One of the most infamous moments came in 2004 when the game was abandoned after false rumours spread that a child had been killed by police outside the stadium. That's how volatile this rivalry is. It only takes a spark. On the pitch, legends like Francesco Totti lived for this fixture, scoring goals and then flashing "I've still got you" messages on shirts. Lazio fans counter with their icons, like Alessandro Nesta or Paolo Di Canio, who treated beating Roma like winning a trophy. The derby doesn't just decide bragging rights, it decides which half of the Eternal City walks tall for months. Madrid derby, Atlético Madrid versus Real Madrid. The Madrid derby is fascinating because it's a clash of two clubs that couldn't be more different. Real Madrid are football's royalty, Champions League collectors, Galacticos, basically the Hollywood of football, while Atlético are the gritty underdogs, the club of the people, who built their identity on sweat, hard work, and that never-say-die attitude. For decades, Real were so dominant that the derby almost felt cruel. Atlético fans lived in constant pain, always the little brother, always reminded of Real's trophies. Then Diego Simeone came in and flipped the script. He gave Atlético bite, discipline, and a "we'll suffer and we'll like it" mentality. Suddenly, they weren't just competing, they were winning, snatching La Liga titles, reaching Champions League finals, and even beating Real in the Copa del Rey at the Bernabeu. But Real Madrid being Real Madrid, they always find a way to twist the knife back. Remember the 2014 and 2016 Champions League finals? Atlético came so close, only for Real Madrid to break their hearts both times. What makes the Madrid derby special today is that it's not just one-sided anymore. Simeone has ensured that whenever Real face Atleti, they know it's going to be a battle. And while Madrid's rivalry is built on style versus sweat, Germany's biggest clash is all about two heavyweights trading punches at the very top. The Der Klassiker, Bayern Munich versus Borussia Dortmund. If you want a rivalry that sums up German football, the Klassiker is it. Bayern Munich, the machine that wins everything, versus Borussia Dortmund, the rebel club that refuses to bow down. It's not about geography, it's about dominance. Bayern has always been the big dog, the club with the money, the stars, and the trophies. Dortmund, on the other hand, built their name on passionate fans, young talent, and their famous yellow wall. The rivalry really exploded in the 2010s when Jurgen Klopp's Dortmund started punching Bayern in the mouth. They won back-to-back Bundesliga titles, beat Bayern in cups, and even dragged them into an all-German Champions League final at Wembley in 2013. Of course, Bayern being Bayern, they snatched that final, because apparently that's their thing. The tension isn't just on the pitch, it's off it too. Bayern have a reputation for swooping in and taking Dortmund's best players. Lewandowski, Hummels, Götze, all these guys switch sides, and each time it felt like Bayern was saying, "Thanks for developing him, we'll take it from here." That adds an extra layer of anger every time the derby rolls around. And just when you think Germany brings the noise, France says, "Hold my wine," because their biggest rivalry is pure hostility. But before we talk about that, if you've been enjoying this video so far, don't let it stop here. Like and subscribe so you have first-hand access to the videos as soon as they drop. Next up, we have the Le Classique, PSG versus Marseille. Paris versus Marseille isn't just a north-south thing. Like many other rivalries, it's a straight-up culture clash. Paris is glitzy, glamorous, and all about money and fashion. Marseille has that working-class identity. Put them together, and you've got a rivalry that feels more like a street fight than a football match. Back in the 90s, Marseille were the kings of France, winning trophies and even lifting the Champions League in '93. PSG were the flashy newcomers trying to make a name for themselves. The two collided, and from then on, it's been pure venom. Fast forward to today, and PSG's Qatari money has made them France's dominant force. And in 2025, they finally lifted the Champions League themselves, crushing Inter 5-0 in the final. But even with that long-awaited triumph, Marseille fans never let them forget. We did it first. That's what keeps the rivalry burning. PSG can rack up titles, Marseille can struggle in mid-table, but whenever these two meet, pride and history are on the line. And for Marseille, beating Paris will always feel like winning a trophy. North London Derby, Arsenal versus Tottenham. The North London Derby is less about silverware and more about pure spite. Arsenal and Tottenham fans don't just dislike each other, they live for each other's misery. And the origins go back over a century when Arsenal moved from South to North London in 1913, suddenly showing up in Spurs' backyard. Imagine a rival just moving into your street and building a mansion next door. That's how Spurs felt. Things escalated in 1919 when Arsenal controversially jumped into the first division at Spurs' expense, thanks to some shady backroom politics. From that moment, Spurs fans have basically seen Arsenal as the villains of football. Arsenal fans, in turn, just enjoy reminding them who the bigger club is. On the pitch, this derby has everything. From Thierry Henry's iconic knee slide in front of Spurs fans to Harry Kane announcing himself with thunderbolts, it's always box office. And the fan banter is ruthless. Arsenal fans mock Spurs for their empty trophy cabinet, while Spurs fans throw back St Totteringham's Day jokes whenever they can. And if you think that's tense, just head a few miles north to Manchester, where the neighbours went from noisy to downright dominant. Manchester Derby, Manchester United versus Manchester City. The Manchester Derby used to be pretty one-sided. For decades, United were the kings of Manchester, while City were that other club your uncle supported just to be different. United had Ferguson, the class of '92, and the trebles. City had, well, Sean Goater and Main Road nostalgia. But then came 2008, and City got their oil money. Everything changed, and suddenly, United weren't laughing anymore, because City started buying stars, hiring elite managers, and actually winning trophies, and the derby transformed overnight. One of the iconic turning points was the 6-1 beating at Old Trafford in 2011. Balotelli lifting his shirt with "Why Always Me" became one of the most meme-worthy derby moments ever. From then on, the so-called noisy neighbours weren't noisy. They were taking over the whole neighbourhood. Now, the derby isn't just about local bragging rights, it's about titles. Pep Guardiola versus whoever United can muster up in the dugout. But as bitter as it is, the derby still delivers. Even if City are the favourites, United have had those shocking wins that remind City fans the rivalry isn't dead. If you think Manchester is divided, though, just wait until you see what happens in the Netherlands. The Klassiker, Ajax versus Feyenoord. The Klassiker is Dutch football's biggest rivalry, and it's not just Amsterdam versus Rotterdam, it's everything those cities represent. Amsterdam is flashy, cultural, and full of style. Rotterdam is industrial and proud of its working-class roots. Put Ajax and Feyenoord on the pitch, and you get 90 minutes of pure hatred. Ajax are the kings of Dutch football, famous for their academy, their European glory, and their total football philosophy. Feyenoord, meanwhile, see themselves as the tough outsiders, always fighting for respect. That dynamic fuels everything. Ajax fans call Feyenoord farmers, and Feyenoord fans respond with chants that can't exactly be repeated politely. On the pitch, Ajax's flair meets Feyenoord's grit, and when Feyenoord actually get one over Ajax, their fans celebrate like it's a Champions League win, because in Dutch football, nothing feels sweeter. Galatasaray versus Fenerbahce. Turkish football is already insane, but Galatasaray versus Fenerbahce is on another level. This is the intercontinental derby, literally. Galatasaray is based on the European side of Istanbul, while Fenerbahce is on the Asian side. So when they clash, it's East versus West, with a ton of history and violence mixed in. One of the most iconic images is Galatasaray fans welcoming teams with a banner reading, "Welcome to Hell." And they mean it. Away players have been stoned with objects, referees have been chased off pitches, and derbies have turned into all-out brawls. On the football side, the rivalry has been fierce for trophies too. Both clubs are giants in Turkey, so the games often have title implications. And when they don't, the pride alone is enough. Losing the derby isn't an option. Club America versus Chivas Guadalajara. El Superclásico of Mexico isn't just a football rivalry, it's a clash of two completely different identities. Club America is the flashy, rich man's club from Mexico City, backed by big money and media power. Chivas, on the other hand, pride themselves on tradition. They only field Mexican players, and that makes their fan base insanely proud. This difference fuels everything. America is seen as the arrogant giants, and Chivas as the people's club. And when they meet, the whole country stops. It's not just about bragging rights, it's about who represents Mexican football more authentically. The games themselves are tense, fiery, and always unpredictable. America's stars might bring the flair, but Chivas' homegrown spirit always makes them dangerous. And the banter is endless. America fans mock Chivas for being provincial, while Chivas fans clap back that Club America have sold out their identity. And finally, we head to Brazil, where rivalries aren't just intense, they're straight-up wars. Corinthians versus Palmeiras. Corinthians versus Palmeiras is Brazil's Derby Paulista, and it's one of the fiercest in South America. Both clubs are based in São Paulo, and their hatred goes back over a century. Palmeiras were originally founded by Italian immigrants, while Corinthians were always seen as the working-class people's club. Right away, you had that cultural clash baked in. Over the decades, the two clubs have battled for state and national dominance, and the derbies have often decided titles, not just bragging rights. One of the defining moments came in 1942, during World War II. The Brazilian government forced Palestra Italia to drop its name because of Italy's ties to the Axis powers. The club was reborn as Palmeiras, and their very first match under the new name was against Corinthians. But in protest, Corinthians refused to take the field. Palmeiras were awarded the win by walkover, and that fiery rebirth set the rivalry ablaze for generations. On the pitch, it's been full of legendary moments, from Ronaldo, the Brazilian one, rediscovering form with Corinthians, to Palmeiras' golden generations asserting themselves. Violence has unfortunately been part of this rivalry too. Outside the stadiums, clashes between fans have sometimes turned deadly, showing just how much this fixture means. But at its core, it's about football identity. Corinthians see themselves as the heartbeat of São Paulo, and Palmeiras as the proud traditional powerhouse. When these two collide, the whole of Brazil watches. And more often than not, the game lives up to the hype. The thing is, football rivalries aren't just games. They're living, breathing feuds that carry history, culture, and more than a little bit of chaos. And the beauty is, no matter where you go in the world, there's always another one waiting to blow your mind. If you've been vibing with this journey through the strongest rivalries in football, make sure you stick around for the next one. Hit like, subscribe, and join us, because trust me, you don't want to miss where we're going next.